This week, a six-person startup beats Google at its own reasoning game using Google's own model, and we'll break down what Poetiq's Arc AGI win really signals for orchestration and meta systems.
Then, we'll dig into OpenAI's first State of Enterprise AI report, including why the top 5% of power users are effectively gaining an extra workday every week.
In our new quick hits section, we've got NVIDIA's H200s heading back to China with a 25% cut for the US government, Trump's push to override state AI rules, Google's new XR glasses, a fresh facts benchmark for model accuracy, and OpenAI poaching Slack CEO to run revenue.
We'll zoom out to the emerging AI internet economy, new licensing standards like RSL 1.0, billion-dollar IP deals like Disney, OpenAI, and mounting pressure on Google from both the EU and its own publishers.
And we'll close out with a big regulatory shift at the end of the Justice Department's disparate impact standard and what that might mean for how we judge bias in algorithms moving forward.
It's time for What the AI, all the AI news you need to know in 30 minutes or less.
All right, let's start it off this week, Annie, with Poetiq. A six-person startup just beat Google on one of the hardest AI reasoning tests out there, and they did it using Google's own model.
Pretty incredible. The startup is called Poetiq, and they just hit 54% on the Arc AGI-2 benchmark. So for context, most models were stuck somewhere around 5% on this test just earlier this year.
Yeah, Arc AGI-2 is that brutal kind of abstract reasoning benchmark. It's got colored grids and pattern rec. It's really hard if you try and do it like humans instinctively. Current models, usually we miss stuff on this because it's hard.
It's hard. And Poetiq didn't actually train on a giant new model. This is not an example of some smarter, faster, cheaper model like we've talked about so much on the pod. They actually just took Gemini 3 Pro off the shelf and they wrapped it in a meta system that does something like generate a solution, critique it, and then refine it, and then verify it before it gives the final answer.
And think of it like a really smart project manager for models. It orchestrates multiple passes, uses multiple LLMs to check work, and only ships the answer once it passes its own kind of self-audit check.
On the Arc AGI-2 semi-private test set, that setup scored 54% at around $30 per task. Google's own specialized Gemini 3 DeepThink variant was reported around 45% and roughly $77 per task. So Poetiq is not only better, it's also cheaper on the same benchmark.
Kind of crazy. The ARC Prize organizers have officially verified Poetiq's numbers. So this isn't just like some marketing claim on a private test, but it is narrow in that this is a synthetic benchmark on a specific test, not we built AGI or we're better than Gemini at everything you might want to do. It is a kind of narrow, focused achievement.
Yep. And the message for executives is really different. The message is that the next wave of gains is going to come less from training better models, ever bigger models. It's going to come more from more clever orchestration. The reasoning and verification layers that you can build on top of any model are what's going to help you win.
Yeah, so for people in our audience, the success of your projects might not be we picked the right LLM, we found the right tool. It might be just as much we designed the right systems and passes and kind of meta infrastructure on top of those models.
That's right. And this is pretty good news, I think, because it's a game where small focused teams can suddenly compete with sort of the biggest labs in the country.
I enjoyed this. This was cool. I love the name Poetiq with a Q. So for those of you trying to Google Poetiq, it is Poetiq with the Q. It was just really interesting for me with all the focus on pre-training and post-training and RLHF and what are we going to do on the models? Is it the models or the difference? To see a team taking on one of the hardest kind of generic abstract reasoning tests and beating Google's own model, using Google's own model with the kind of layers of kind of meta analysis and process later on top. It just shows you how important the non-model parts of deploying a model in a specific context really are.
100%. Well, Jeff, let's transition and talk a little bit about OpenAI. OpenAI just dropped its first ever State of Enterprise AI report. And the headline is pretty simple and clear. AI is not a pilot anymore. It's a productivity engine, and it's changing how people work.
The numbers in this thing were pretty big. 75% of employees say AI boosts their speed or quality, and another 75% say AI helps them do tasks they literally couldn't have done without the assistance of AI.
I mean, I think that's the headline with all of our AI stuff. All of the numbers are big.
Always big.
Yeah, always big. This stat really did hit me because it's not like shaving a couple minutes off a workflow in some like really iterative form. It's literally just expanding the universe of what people are actually capable of doing at work, which we've talked a lot about optimization and productivity, but less about I just couldn't do this task before and now I can do this task. So that's pretty amazing.
And his book couldn't and didn't have the time, right? Just couldn't, and that wasn't physically capable, didn't have the skills, and didn't have the time. So that's, and there's a really huge performance gap emerging between how the top users use these tools and the median user. The top 5% of AI users send 6 times more messages than the median employee, according to this report. And the top coders, which are maybe the most sophisticated category users, send 17 times more than the median coder. So there's just a tremendous difference in how much people are taking advantage of this from the top end to the median.
That's right. And it really what the takeaway of that is that top performers aren't just like super talented, they're actually using AI as their superpower. Companies need to start asking who are your power users and why isn't everybody a power user? Why isn't everybody working that way? Because if you can fundamentally just add more hours to your day, why not do that?
It's a good way to think of it. OpenAI's study here showed that the average business user is saving 40 to 60 minutes a day, so an hour a day. But the power users report saving 10 hours a week. It's a whole business day. It's like having a sixth day of your week every week, or working four and getting a fifth day for free. And choose how you use this, but it's kind of an unbelievable unlock for performance and productivity for those who are using it effectively.
I know how many times in our own lives, I think I've probably heard every adult person say, I just need an extra day, or I just need an extra hour, or I just need this, that, or the other thing. And it's literally now possible with AI if you really kind of train yourself and push yourself to become a power user. But if you're running a team, really think about how that compounding effect is enormous. It changes project planning, staffing, your org design, and it's probably happening pretty unevenly across your company right now.
Yeah, this really is that big takeaway, both for I think teams and for individuals. Like the teams that are using AI effectively, the individuals. I mean, it's the old saying. We've said this 100 times probably in this podcast. AI is not going to take your job. People who know how to use AI better than you do are going to take your job. And this is just really highlighting how much of an advantage the power users are getting over the median users. And so, if you're not a power user yet, you should focus on becoming a power user. And if your team isn't a power user and you're a manager or a team leader, think about how you get your team up to speed to become power users of these technologies. It really does make a big difference.
That's right. The gap is widening quickly. And if OpenAI publishes this data, imagine what they're seeing behind the scenes, to be honest with you. Enterprises that treat AI as a core competency are really just pulling ahead. So those that are treating it as a pilot, that means you're behind.
Yeah, my guess is they have internal numbers that are even better than this, but they just, even more wow. But they don't publish. Well, this was like a bit of a survey and a bit of, one of the things we team at Anthropic do, which was looking at queries from different kinds of users and how they were using it and how many queries, and kind of using their data at a meta level to do these analyses. So interesting. I'm sure we seem to be getting these reports from everybody. So I'm sure we'll continue to see these analyses from the LLM providers on how people are using them, and surveys and how they're being leveraged and the results people are seeing. So it is fascinating, fun to watch. I liked seeing this. We've seen Anthropic do this before, so fun to see it from OpenAI. Well, if you're getting value from what the AI, hit that like or subscribe button, share this episode with someone you know who should be leveling up their AI game. It really does help people find the show and hopefully find the value out of it that you're finding. All right. Well, we've got a new episode segment this week. We're calling Quick Hits. We got a lot of stories I didn't think needed a lot of time, but I felt like you needed to know them. So here we go. We'll just trade these off. Trump allowing the sale of NVIDIA H200 processors to quote unquote approved Chinese customers, and the US government taking a 25% cut. So we're relaxing the rules. We're picking our Chinese customers that we want to have them, and we're taking a little 25% cut off the top. It's nice to be in charge sometimes.
Nice to be in charge. And at the same time, Trump says he'll sign an executive order to override state level AI rules, pushing for one national standard. That's already drawing bipartisan pushback from state AGs who don't want their hands tied on things like hallucination harms and kid safety online.
Okay. And he actually signed this, didn't he? And in between when we wrote our script and when he signed so we'll have to see. I'm curious how how everybody responds, what the federal government can do, but he's He's intent.
It's gonna be an interesting week. I think next week we're gonna have a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about. Well, over at Google, they just pre-announced their first AI glasses coming in 2026. Think lightweight Warby Parker style frames running Gemini. Some are audio only. Some have tiny in-lens displays, both one and two. This is clearly Google trying to catch up with Meta's Ray-Ban line and make the AI on your face a mainstream thing. Maybe this will finally be the product that gets me switching over from iOS to Android, though they're rumored to be having iOS support as well as Android support. So maybe I'll just get Gemini on my face with my iPhone. We'll see.
I hope they come up with a better marketing slogan than AI on your face, because
I
that's
wouldn't trust them
I
to.
don't know.
History is not good for them coming up with a better AI marketing slogan than that.
That's right. Well, while we're on product updates, OpenAI just launched GPT 5.2, seemingly in response to the recent growth and surging popularity of Google's Gemini, calling it, quote, the best model yet for everyday professional use, end quote. It's supposedly better at pretty much everything, and it still comes in instant thinking and pro modes.
So I've got it. I haven't noticed the difference, but I did notice yesterday when I went from 5.1 to 5.2, I got a little excited. I haven't gotten a chance to yet to test this out too much. Well, Google DeepMind also rolled out a new facts benchmark, basically a stress test for how factual different models really are across a few different types of tests. So really quickly, because I think these are interesting, a parametric knowledge test, which is responding to factual questions based solely on what the model learned during training. So it's kind of like going to your chatbot and asking it a question. What they call a grounding test, which is responding based on the knowledge provided in the LLM context window. Read this PDF and tell me what it says, right? Search augmented answers, how well an LLM could use a web search tool to find answers. These often involved multiple steps, like give me the sum of the ages of the medal winners of this event in these Olympics. So you got to go and do a bunch of different searches. And they gave all the models the same search tools for this. So you didn't have the better tool or not. And then a multimodal model looking at analyzing images or data files. So kind of different, how well can models give you the correct answer on these different things. And unsurprisingly, on the Google DeepMind leaderboard, Gemini models and the latest GPT and Claude systems are all clustered, but Gemini did win. They're clustered around the 60 to 80% factuality range, which is good, but not the kind of blind trustworthy. They did work with Kaggle to publish most of the questions and answers, and they have some of those that are private so that people can't train to cheat the test, but they are working with an independent party to kind of manage the facts leaderboard going forward. But kind of cool way to think about different types of factuality for models.
Interesting. And finally, in sort of people moves, OpenAI just poached Slack CEO Denise Dresser to be its chief revenue officer. She's now in charge of turning ChatGPT's massive usage into actual enterprise revenue, which of course has been yet to be seen. This is a clear signal that OpenAI is moving from cool product to full court press on monetization, and they're going to have a seasoned SaaS operator running the business side.
Maybe full court press, but then we got the code red that says don't do anything but make ChatGPT better and get everybody to use it last week. So we'll see how new chief revenue officer gets how well resourced her team is in the middle of the code red on ChatGPT usage versus Gemini. TBD.
Well, while we're talking about revenue and chief revenue officers, let's talk about sort of the economics of AI. The AI internet is quietly getting its own economic stack, and we saw a few new pieces emerge this week.
Yeah, we did. So on one side, you've got publishers saying, if you're going to scrape our stuff for AI, you got to pay. And here I'm talking about RSL 1.0, a new web standard that turns the old robots.txt file, what told you if you could or couldn't scrape it for Google, into a licensing and payments layer, not just a yes/no approval layer.
Yeah, this is super interesting. And the way that it actually works is it doesn't just say crawl or don't crawl. It actually lets specific sites say, yes, you can use my content for traditional search, but not for AI answers, not for AI training, or only under specific sort of licensing terms. So it puts a lot of sort of power and choice back into the content provider.
Yeah, the payment for AI answers versus AI training also very interesting that they're distinguishing between answering in using it as a kind of context grounding versus using it for training. And this one really matters because the big content distribution networks, the CDNs, Cloudflare, Akamai, Fastly, they're signing on. So this isn't just a polite note to AI companies; it's something that the pipes of the internet are actually going to be able to enforce. I'm giving it some real power.
For sure. And, Jeff, it wouldn't be an episode of What the AI without talking about a $1 billion deal. So
$1 billion.
$1 billion. So money's starting to move. Disney just cut a 3-year licensing deal with OpenAI and is investing about $1 billion so that Sora and ChatGPT images can legally use about 200 Disney, Marvel, Pixar, and Star Wars characters in fan-made videos and images.
I may have to open up Sora again. It's been a while, but now I want to see all the Star Wars fan fiction in there.
Or videos with Darth Vader for
That's right.
sure.
But so now you've got on the one end RSL trying to set rules for everyone. You've got some giant IP owners trying to enforce their rights. And if you want to use Star Wars or Pixar that's going to crown jewels of IP, you got to pay, and you can't train on them without permission.
That's right. And meanwhile, the AI companies are standardizing their own plumbing. The Linux Foundation just launched, or Linux Foundation, excuse me, just launched the Agentic AI Foundation, pulling in Anthropic's MCP, Block's Goose, and OpenAI's agents.md under one neutral roof.
Yeah, so MCP is basically like the USB-C for AI agents. It's how models plug into tools, data, third-party applications, OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, they're all backing the same protocol. So agents can move across clouds or products, and now they're putting it into this independent standards organization.
Yep. So we've got a standard for how agents talk to the web and a standard for how the web talks back about rights and money, plus premium licensing deals like Disney OpenAI that put real price tags on what we can kind of think is the top shelf IP.
Yeah, and right in the middle of it is Google getting squeezed. The EU has opened an antitrust probe into whether AI overviews and AI mode are built on publisher content illegally and YouTube data without fair compensation or a real opt out. So, as we said, some of these RSL questions, the EU is saying they've got an opinion and they're coming after Google.
I think Google's going to have they're going to have a challenge fighting this one, but almost on cue, they announced some updates. More inline links in AI mode, AI written blurbs explaining sources, having something called preferred sources for news, and special treatment for your subscriptions. So I think maybe a signal that they recognize that a little bit of a shift is needed here.
And breaking news too, Disney apparently also suing Google over usage of some of their data after cutting the deal with OpenAI. So you got, standards bodies being emerged, standards being developed, licensing deals being cut, and regulators getting there. Although, kind of my takeaway from the first set of the stories is looking at the EU and going, maybe just let's see how this plays out before you try and stick your nose in what needs to get done. Because a lot of these players are finding, I don't think we know what the answers are yet. And you're seeing these things play out among the players. And so there's an opportunity for some emerging standards. But it's going to be fascinating, all these moving pieces for how these apps and models play together and how they pay one another. It's fast changing space.
For sure. And I think it is true that, we want to see how it plays out. We don't want to overregulate too quick. But I actually kind of like that the EU stepped in because somebody like OpenAI, or Disney or Google, like they can do these big billion-dollar deals with each other, but all of the long tail content providers that rely on Google for big parts of their business can't really afford to take Google on. So having sort of a centralized, EU that's going to take Google on, I think is important for some of those smaller people that can't strike billion-dollar deals with Google. So
Yeah, I'd love to see someone other than the EU do it because I don't trust I don't, the history there of setting the right balance of regulations. I still have to click that accept cookies banner all the time, and I know where that one came from. So I feel like maybe not the best place to have this thing decided, but it is interesting to see people sticking in there, and it is true, and it makes me very excited that on the RSL side you see Cloudflare, Akamai. I mean, the pipes that really are where these AI, for those who aren't as familiar, most content that's distributed over the internet, when you access a site, you don't go directly to a server owned by the New York Times or by CNN or whatever. You go through one of these big content distribution networks. And so they have a huge percentage of the internet's traffic going through their networks. And so when they enforce a policy and say, oh, we're not going to let an AI crawler hit there, they can really do it at scale. And they provide a lot of leverage for the small publishers when they hop on board. So it's exciting to see them hopping into this space of protecting content according to publishers' desires, because I think it does give those smaller publishers a lot more leverage.
yeah, totally agreed. And they actually have the power and the capability to drive real change in a way that probably the EU is going to struggle with. But if you have an AI story from your team, drop it to email at whattheai.fm. Jeff and I love hearing what's actually happening in the wild and, of course, discussing it on the pod.
All right. And talking about discussing on the pod, this last one, Andy, it's a little bit far afield from pure AI, but it was just too much in our wheelhouse for me to skip. So I threw it in here. And I do think it's relevant for AI, so bear with me. But the Department of Justice this week ended the 50-year-old standard of disparate impact that uses statistical disparities as evidence of illegal discrimination, even without a finding of discriminatory intent. So this is a long-standing tradition. There's a lot of history behind disparate impact. Annie, this is like AI and regulation. It's a huge part of financial services regulation. You got to have thoughts. Give me your thoughts. What do you think about the ending of the disparate impact standard by the Department of Justice?
I definitely have thoughts. Maybe an asterisk next to ending, and I would say ending for now.
They're ending enforcement, right? They haven't changed the law, but they're going to end it. So that's a thing that can be changed.
Pendulum is always swinging. The great thing about disparate impact is the focus on statistical rigor in answering this question. And I think that that is sorely lacking in a lot of places. People don't use math to answer questions. And so the statistical nature of sort of the disparate impact standards, I think, is quite good. I think that actually this requirement that somebody had to have intent to cause harm in order for them to have done something wrong is maybe not the right standard. You wouldn't really apply that in any sort of criminal cases. Like, well, did you mean to run that person over with your car? Probably not, but you're still going to be in trouble if you did it. Right. And so I think that this intent thing is maybe you shouldn't have to have had intent. If you harm somebody, you should take accountability for that. But on the other side, the disparate impact sort of framework and how people think about that, it is 50 years old and technology has changed an awful lot. So there are a lot of opportunities for like modernization of how we think about this type of stuff. As a practical example, in lending, the ACOA has long said you can't use any of these variables in underwriting because use of the variables could cause discrimination. Well, now that we have more sophisticated technology, use of the variables could actually prevent discrimination. But the law doesn't say use them in a way that prevents discrimination. It says don't use them at all because it like assumes that usage of them causes discrimination or would be discriminatory in its intent. So I think that there's some definite opportunity to sort of modernize how we think about these things. And sometimes in order to modernize, you have to just be like, okay, let's put the past away and let's start with something new. So I really actually hope that this will maybe be the start of some like fruitful discussion of like how really should we be thinking about these things in the new age. I know I would like to be involved in that discussion, so I'm glad we're talking about it on the pod, and I talk about this with a lot of, friends and colleagues all the time because I think it's important. So, what are your thoughts?
I also have lots of thought. Listeners should know that Annie and I chat before we start recording, and this is the kind of thing that we might spend 45 minutes before we hit record just talking about because we find it really fascinating. So I apologize. That's why it's the last story of the episode. If you don't like it, you could turn this off and move on to your next podcast of the day. But we really enjoy it. I tend to agree. I mean, I do think the standards enforced when you don't have a statistical approach are very difficult, and they're super difficult, not just for AI, but any kind of algorithmic decision making, which increasingly is going to be the way critical decisions are made. And I think it makes sense that we have statistical approaches to make those decisions, and then statistical approaches to measure are those decisions fair and are they the kind of decisions we want to have. And so I think that's a good thing. Disparate Impact did that. I don't know that the standard worked that well in many instances. Not, I can say that if somebody's not subject to regulators anymore and having to talk to folks, but I think the focus purely on the disparate impact left out the opportunity that you say a rising tide lifts all boats, but it had no sense of model accuracy, or are we improving the outcomes for everyone, but some more than others? That's can be considered disparate impact, but still, like, if everybody's better off under model A versus model B, that should be a thing that we like, even if people aren't, even if that improvement is not equitably distributed. We might want to fix the equitable distribution, but that doesn't mean we want to stop the impact. I actually think you're running over somebody with a car analogy is really interesting because it is true that if you run somebody over with a car without meaning to, like, you still get in trouble, but you do get in a different kind of trouble. There's a different kind of law, right? That's the difference between murder and manslaughter and negligence. Should you have known, you didn't intend to do it, but were you negligent, or was it really like something that you couldn't have foreseen? And those are all kind of different standards that apply. And I think that that kind of gradation is really important. Like if you make an algorithm that's intentionally biased, like you should have a different kind of punishment than if an algorithm becomes somewhat biased. And that should be very different than if you have an algorithm that is providing benefit to everyone, but differentially across classes. Like that's the kind of thing you might want to go, hey, we need to look into that, but we also want to like have you use it because it's naturally better for everyone. And so I'm happy to see it being rethought. I'm not sure that ending enforcement is the best way, but to your point, I do think sometimes in laws and regulations, you have to clear away before you can start the fresh paper of thinking. And often it's hard for the people who wrote the kind of regulations that support the general principle to do the demolition of the old to make way for the new. And so we've got an administration I think many disagree with that's eliminating this, but it will open up the opportunity for us to rethink how we do this kind of analysis across fields over time. So it'll be exciting to see what replaces it over time. Maybe not immediately, but over time. What do we come up with to replace the disparate impact standard?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think like one thing that is really positive about disparate impact testing is that it gives you lens into pockets of people that you are not currently serving but could be serving if you had a better model that was better, more accurate at predicting whatever your target is. Obviously for us in lending, it's whether or not somebody can repay a loan. But if you have a more accurate model, you can bring more people into the ecosystem, which means you have more customers, which means you make more revenue, which means you beat your competitors. Like all of those things are good for business. But this sort of standard of like, the only way to pass the disparate impact test is to have everything equal, ironically means you have to exclude more people. So it's like the way that the test evolved over time actually was very much like antithetical to the reason for the test in the first place. So I mean, that's my point about it just being like sorely outdated. And, you would end up actually having to shrink the customer served in order to try to get to this fake balance that doesn't exist. We talk about this a lot there's a little plug for our AI certification course. We do like a long form, non-podcast style AI certification course to talk about, how AI is built and the sort of policy matters around AI. And we talk a lot about this because I think it's super important. And, we're going to see post this sort of shift with, I mean, earlier this year, we had the executive order about disparate impact. Now we have this news from the Justice Department. So hopefully more people are going to enter the game of just having discussion of like, well, what now? Right? Because I think that that's an important discussion.
And hopefully we can center that discussion around not just, I think too often this is what we see as protecting from potential downsides. And also you want to see the regulation going, how do we also maximize the potential upsides for everyone, not just mitigate the downsides? And if we can find lots of private parties coming out with, how they're measuring these things and finding a better path, I think that's a hopeful thing for the future.
That's right. And I think the sad thing about the past is like a lot of people have thoughts and feelings and great ideas on this topic, but they were afraid to express them because they were afraid of the CFPB and they were afraid of the Justice Department and they were afraid that like, oh, if I express my opinion, someone's going to come after me. So at the very least, I hope that some of these changes take away people's fears to like get their ideas out on the table, because when the best ideas are shared, then the best outcome happens. But if people are afraid to share them, then that's not great. I am excited to see what unfolds.
Well, it seems like there's a lot of stories. We'll see what unfolds next week because there's a lot of stuff going on. But I think that's going to be it for this week. But as always, we'll be back next week to break down whatever crazy stuff happens in the world of AI. Annie, I will see you next week.
See you next week.
Ready to expand your AI knowledge? Want to become the go-to AI expert in your organization? Take the next step with Upstart's AI certification for financial services. This comprehensive course simplifies the fundamentals of artificial intelligence for financial services professionals. Both the course and this podcast are brought to you by Upstart, whose leading AI lending marketplace connects millions of consumers to banks and credit unions that leverage Upstart's AI technology to deliver superior credit products, from personal loans to auto loans to home equity lines of credit. If you learned something useful this week, hit subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating on iTunes or Spotify. Your support can help others discover What the AI. And finally, share your biggest AI questions and insights with us at email@whattheai.fm. We really do read every message and we do our best to cover them all on the show.